Hi, I'm Moshe, and I'm autistic.
I'm Leah, and I'm boring.
Welcome to Now You Know One Autistic,
A podcast about neurodiversity in couples, marriage, meltdowns, and making it all work.
The opinions expressed in this podcast reflect the experience of one couple and one autistic.
Nothing that you hear in this podcast should be taken as a medical opinion. And unless otherwise stated, no one is an accredited specialist in any of the many fields that comprise the autism spectrum.
But as someone who is on the autism spectrum, I feel that my experiences will be very valuable to many of you, whether you're on the spectrum, a support person like Leah, or just a curious bystander.
If you think that you or someone you care about may be autistic, consult your family doctor. Hi, Moshe.
Hi, Leah.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. So now we're at part 2 of Loving the Spectrum.
Yeah, so last week on a very special episode of Now You Know One Autistic, Leah and I shared our origin story in more detail. We sort of kind of raised it in our first episode so you would have an idea of who we were. But last episode, I won't say last week because you might listen to this episode a week after that. You might listen to it right afterwards. We're not really sure yet. But last week, our origin and a lot of the, we'll say, gritty details of our near misses and big misses and all the other things that happened were revealed. So you know a little bit more about what happened and not necessarily always so favorable light.
Mm-hmm.
And this week, we're going to, as we promised, touch more on the lighter side of our past and really get into specifically love and relationships when it comes to autistic people and autistic teenagers and romantic feelings that develop. And
I would like to put a vocal disclaimer here. Actually, I get the feeling that there will be some adult topics coming forward, and maybe we might have some detailed descriptions of some more adult themed things. So just to be aware of who's listening to this with you, it's not necessarily not for children, but younger listeners should probably have a trusted adult that they can ask questions to.
pretty much. So in the past, we talked a lot about some relatively benign stuff, but as we were getting into some more deeper discussions about things like intimacy and sex.
I mean, puberty
Puberty
on
is
its own as a topic.
So it's not like rated R or whatever, but it's definitely like a PG-13 meaning. I guess we'll see where it goes, and if you notice a disclaimer on it, that's why.
So where we left off last time was a lot of detail, maybe too much detail for some of you guys about our relationship and how that happened. Various failures on our part in terms of, sort of actuating the way that we felt about each other, and how that sort of dovetailed in with how puberty hit both Moshe and I differently.
And how we responded to it together, and how each of us
Lack of response.
And how we handled it individually. And it made for some difficult listening, perhaps, but it wasn't all bad. There were a lot of really cute stories, which we're looking forward to sharing.
So now I would like to talk about teenagers in general, right? And what sort of tends to happen when you become a certain age, let's say for neurotypical, right? So you become a certain age, everybody knows the story. This, I hope you do at this point that you've been to school. You become a certain age and hormones go through your body and they cause you to have changes to your body and to grow up into, a man or a woman or some other variety of person, which we're not going to touch too much on. And that causes a lot of changes in priorities and feelings. For a neurotypical, that can absolutely look like a straight line, right? So to give you an example of what happened with me, I hit puberty. I started to feel more interested in being romantic with other people. I started to feel more interested in dating. I started to feel physical, let's say, I don't know, can I say sexual feelings for people? And for me, that was a straight line to sort of pursuing a person,
Right.
possibly, or allowing other people to pursue me. Now, what was difficult for me personally was I'm a girl. I'm a girl, and in Montreal, you go to high school in grade 7. There's no middle school. So right about the time when my body began to change and I started to get curves and I started to be really attractive, I was sort of pulled out of my elementary school environment and thrown into school with, let's be honest, grown men who were graduating high school. And that caused some issues for me, as I had spoken about earlier, where boys would aggressively pursue me. And that was the message that I got, that boys aggressively pursue you, and it's your job to sort of fend them off or decide that you want to be with them. And that's how life goes. So how did that look for you?
So my line was somewhat less straight, and it really it had to do with like I mentioned last week that there seems to be a bit of a barrier sometimes when it comes to neurodivergence and being aware of their feelings. Of course, obviously, you're not always going to know, but you can at least suspect. But with an autistic person who oftentimes will be developmentally delayed in a variety of ways, it's not to say that it's a universal thing or it's specifically targeted in one area. But speaking from my experience as one autistic, I had feelings that you would normally associate with what's growing up, with maturing, with going through puberty. But I had absolutely no idea what they were or what to do with them or what they refer to.
So it's important now to highlight, and again, Moshe and I are talking about ourselves a lot to the point where it kind of feels a little bit indulgent, but please indulge us for a moment, because Moshe had a situation where he knew he loved me, right? Because we loved each other forever since we were little, right? We were friends.
Since we were 7.
And he then developed, special feelings for me, but he had no idea how to put those two things together.
Right.
And I knew how to put those two things together. And I knew, based on my experience, what was supposed to happen, but none of those things were happening. So in general, through some of my research and life experience, I found that it's actually quite typical for autistic teenagers to have challenges in expressing love verbally or in socially acceptable ways. So, for example, Moshe never, gave me overtures or bought me flowers or technically asked me out on a date or kissed me goodbye at the end of a date. Things that you would come to expect, right?
Right.
But instead, he did some really cute and adorable things that only now am I beginning to understand were him saying, I love you and I have romantic feelings for you and I don't know how to do it.
Because with autistics, often, and again, not all autistics, but with autistics, especially ones that struggle with communication, as I clearly seem to, we try to find other ways of expressing ourselves when we're not able to find the words per se. So a lot of them are completely involuntary and we just do them because they feel right. And a lot of them are voluntary because you rationalize, or at least I rationalize, I have these feelings when I'm around Leia. I don't actually know what they are or what to do with them. I only know what I want to do. And I'm pretty sure she doesn't want me to do them. So I probably should talk to her about it, but I don't know if what I'm telling her is going to be the right thing. So what I'll do instead is try to show her how I feel and maybe she'll get it.
All right. So a lot of autistics will express love in actions or by sharing their interests. And again, retroactively, I can see that for what it was. And often there were a lot of special memories that I kept through my entire life. And I didn't really know why they meant so much to me. I don't know. Let's tell a cute story.
Let's see. I'm trying to think.
It was really, okay, so it was really annoying. But we often, for whatever reason, our parents always brought us to beaches and water parks. And almost without fail, he would come up to me, grab me in the water and attempt to drown me. Explain what that means. I wasn't moved by it.
So touch, when it comes to neurodivergence, is often a sign of trust and a sign of affinity. Because touch is always so welcome, and because a lot of neurodivergents struggle with touch, it's typically reserved, if at all, for people that we feel a particular closest to. I didn't necessarily like to be touched by people that I didn't know or I didn't trust. And it made me uncomfortable. Of course, I would skip it up. And people were telling me that I was rude. But I love to touch Leia. I love to touch her as much as I could find a reason to without seeming weird. And sometimes while seeming weird. And what I wanted to do was find a way of showing her that I enjoyed being close to her and I enjoyed touching her. And as a boy, my particular technique was to be violent about it.
Roughhousing.
Yes, not like violent, like punching her in the face with her, but like grabbing her and wrestling with her and finding excuses to like push her and stuff. It sounds really rough and mean.
Oh, it was.
But for my, autistic brain, it was the closest that I could come to a romantic gesture.
Right. So at that point, I found it very annoying. And I would put up with it to a point, and then I would just get really angry and sort of stalk away onto the beach or by the pool or wherever it was and just sort of stew and get really upset because I didn't understand it. And I also want to point out now that the way it sounds, I understand, doesn't seem healthy, right? So touching without somebody's consent, not healthy. Acting violently toward them, not healthy. And we understand that. By no means are we encouraging anybody to do that. It's just an example of how Moshe actually inappropriately showed his feelings.
And that's definitely something to discuss because, again, as I mentioned in the last episode and in previous episodes, I was essentially raised without any understanding or acceptance that I was neurodivergent. Forget being autistic. They didn't understand why, or that, why I did the things I did, or that there was anything else going on other than the fact that I was a very, very difficult and emotional child. So nobody took the time to discuss with me appropriate contact.
So ultimately, this story is actually extremely romantic because again, it begins with sort of inappropriate contact, right? And me being upset. But then when he would see that I was upset, he would gather his head and he would gather his thoughts and he would come sit next to me on the beach and he would say, "I'm sorry, don't be mad at me." And I would be like, "Well, I'm upset, but you're my best friend, so I love you. And we would hug it out and I'd be okay." And then the next time we'd go to a beach, he would do it all over again. But that's a different topic.
So I did that a lot, and I would take time away from the things that interested me, or I would involve Leia in things that interested me as a way of involving her in my own inner circle of hyper-focus, or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. It was all very subtle and very, I don't know, it was very meaningful to me and probably didn't mean much to her, at least not in the same context. But it was the best that I had at the time. So it was not something that would have been that uncommon for someone who was still trying to figure out what to do with what was going on.
So the nugget of what we're trying to get to here is that autistic teenagers have very specific needs, actually, where this is considered. And again, it depends on the level of functionality, of course. If somebody is nonverbal or much higher needs, this might not apply to them necessarily, but it might, because everybody has a need to feel loved and accepted, right?
Exactly.
So autistic teenagers need extra support to help navigate emerging romantic feelings.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you should talk about to your autistic teenager to make sure that they have the support? Well, first of all, okay, you're going to notice changes in it, like you would with any other child. You're going to notice the obvious secondary sexual characteristics expressing. Periods, breasts, body hair, height and growing, facial hair, all that stuff.
Right.
So then you might want to take the time to sit down with them and not have a birds and a bees, necessarily conversation where, suave goes into tabby and all that stuff. But you want to explain the things that might be obvious to a neurotypical person that are not obvious to an autistic person. So the first thing I have written here is explain attraction. What's attraction?
So, I mean, when you look at somebody or some person, whether it's a person you know or a picture of a person or whatever, certain feelings may arise that, if you don't understand attraction, might be confusing. And for somebody who understands a little bit more, it might be obvious, like, oh, I have a crush on that person. Or, oh, I think I really like this person. I'm not really sure how it works in a neurotypical situation because I'm not. But what it worked for me, or what it looked like for me rather, was mostly unwelcome feelings that I didn't understand.
Right. So for me too, and I can understand that, they weren't unwelcome, but when you're very attracted to somebody, it can cause intense physical feelings in your body that can actually feel like sickness. So I can understand why, to somebody who struggles with, sensory things, it could be an issue. Like that whole butterflies in their stomach thing.
Right.
It could feel like being nauseous. It could feel like having a fever. It could feel like palpitations or being shortness of breath. It could feel like unwelcome and unfamiliar things happening in your private parts area that you must have.
You're going to have the kinds of conversations that you would normally have with your children, regardless of whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical. But the crux of it when it comes to neurodivergence is really when it comes to things like the feelings that you may experience, what they might mean, and really what is appropriate and what is not. Because what a lot of neurodivergents struggle with is social cues. And social cues, especially when it comes to pursuing a relationship, are extremely important because it's a dance, really. And the inclination for every other thing is, I want it, so I'm going to get it. I like the look of that, so I'm going to go close to it and look at it. I want to touch that, so I'm going to touch it. And a lot of that kind of mentality has to be explained. Because if you're a parent, particularly, of an autistic child, or if you are a partner of an autistic person, then you may end up having to have a conversation about appropriate and inappropriate touch, or appropriate and inappropriate action.
Right. So let's talk about a story again, that if I wasn't who I was and you weren't who you were and we weren't so familiar, it could have gone very badly. Yes. So this always goes for parents, for whatever reason, wanting us to go swimming.
Yes.
And
It's a lot of swimming when we...
I was in your mom's room.
Right.
Changing.
Right.
Into my bathing suit. And do you think that teenage Moshe took that as an excuse to leave the room and give me privacy? Or do you think that teenage Moshe took that as an excuse to stand there and watch me change?
If you know me well enough at this point, I think you know the answer. But it was very much, as I just said, a case of, I wanna, so I'm gonna. And if she doesn't want me to, then I won't.
I mean, the way it went was kind of very cute and sweet again, because of who I am and because of who he is. And because we were close, I sort of just like covered myself up, turned around, and I gave him a slap, like, get out of here, dummy. But again, that's one of those things that has to be explained, that if you don't know the person very well, or even if you do, it can go very badly when you do something.
Unfortunately, there's lots of stories and posts on social media and accounts from parents of autistic children, particularly, unfortunately, autistic boys.
Right. If I had made a big deal out of it, it could have been a whole thing.
Because when you start developing feelings and attractions, you have to, that's the time to really try to understand the appropriateness of actions. Because it's not, unfortunately, very uncommon for autistic boys to be getting in trouble for looking at girls or peeking into the girl's locker room because they just kind of wanted to see, or staring at a girl for too long because of something. And I have a personal story to share. And again, it doesn't cast me in the most positive light, but, you know, honest truth. So when I was, I want to say, I was in grade 4 or 5. A new girl transferred into the school that I was going to, and I had never seen her before, and I wasn't particularly interested in anyone at that point. At least my brain wasn't, because I was still focused on like the newest video games or whatever. And she was, you know, for lack of a better word, pretty developed in certain areas. And I would just kind of sit there and stare at her sometimes. And it wasn't because I was attracted to her, I don't think. And it wasn't necessarily because I was trying to give her any signals. It was mostly just me trying to figure out why I wanted to look at her. And eventually she was just like, "Do you mind?" I was like, "Sorry." And it was one of those things where I was really uncomfortable with myself, because I didn't actually understand what was going on and why it was going on. So it just kind of happened. And that is not the first time that I have been accused of doing things that I really wasn't doing intentionally, but mostly just trying to understand why there was an inclination to do them.
Whereas I'm a different kind of person that way. My responses are very different. I can't really tell you why I am the way I am, but I have a lot of thresholds for stuff like that. So if you had been staring at me, I would have been like, "Hi, why are you looking at me?" I would have been like, "Do you mind, weirdo?" But that's just me and I respond to things.
It really depends on the nature of a person. And unfortunately, I'm actually quite ashamed, because as I got older, I thought a lot about the very brief interaction that I had with this girl. And I questioned why. I think her name might have been Whitney or something. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. And the crux of what it made a difference for me was not even that she was there, and not even that she was particularly attracted to me, or not even that I was, you know, caught looking at her. It was actually that I felt sorry for her, because her reaction and subsequent feelings, because after the episode there, I recall that she started crying. And it took me a few years later before I started thinking about it. And I realized that she was probably someone that got looked at a lot. Because unfortunately, when you're like 11 or 12, and you're a girl and you're in a class full of boys, and you happen to, you know, develop at a certain rate, you're going to catch the eye of people.
Yes.
And it's going to make girls, especially ones who don't want that kind of attention, very uncomfortable.
That's exactly what I described happening to me in high school.
Yeah.
Except for me, it wasn't, you know, my chest area, it was my bum area. For it was the same concept. Maybe worse, because then people sort of follow behind you and watch you walk and stuff. Anyway, it's pretty gross. I can talk more about it another time if anybody, you know, has similar experiences or wants to hear about it.
Of course.
So this brings up to me actually an interaction that I had with another autistic who happened to be a friend of my ex-spouse. And he's a very nice man. I want to say he's definitely a man now, but then we were, I don't know, early adulthood. So I guess now, if you want to say. And very nice, very sweet. Doesn't seem like the type that would ever hurt a fly, but absolutely socially inappropriate to the extreme. He was raised not even acknowledging that there was anything wrong with him. So he got a diagnosis maybe around the same time as you or even later, but he's more significantly affected than more socially anyway. And I was just sitting on a couch talking to him one day, just talking about, I don't even know what, video games or something. And all of a sudden he reached out and he just hopped my breast.
Yeah, I would tell that.
Out of nowhere. And I can tell you he meant nothing by it. But for me, I was like, how do I react to this now? He doesn't mean anything by it. I don't want to hurt his feelings. I don't want to make him feel rejected, but I can't let this go.
Of course.
So it would have been better for somebody to sit him down at some point before he was like, I don't know, 22 or something.
Right.
When we're that age, and tell him you don't just honk women's breasts because they're there.
Right. You told me that you did that. And how did it go?
Better than you would expect. He just removed his hand and he continued talking.
Right. Because it wasn't.
It was very matter of fact. It's not like a rapey scenario that you would actually picture in a movie or anything.
Right.
It was literally as you described. Oh, that's nice. I want to touch it. Okay, don't touch it. Oh, sorry. Okay. And then we moved right on.
And that really goes into.
But again, if I were a different girl, that could have gone very badly.
It could, because, of course, especially women are I mean, they have to be on guard for that. But when it comes to neurodivergence and neurodiversity, it's a real challenge. And I mean, okay, I just want to say for the record that I'm not stating that neurodivergents are more likely to do inappropriately touching activities, but it's all about boundaries and social cues and not necessarily reacting the way you feel. Because what we really try to do, or what most people try to do now, certainly not then, was when you're discussing the idea of neurodivergence and relationships, is appropriate versus inappropriate actions and appropriate versus inappropriate feelings. When you want to talk about actions, because if you are a boy or a girl, I guess, and you see someone that you're interested in, and first of all, you're at the level of understanding that you know that you're interested in this person, the next question is, what should I do about it? And there's a bunch of different things you can do. And this is why, if you're very lucky, you have family members that are very supportive and aware, first of all, of your adversity. And you can talk about things. So like appropriate and inappropriate touch, and
Absolutely.
appropriate and inappropriate feelings. And also the idea of respecting yourself. And that's very important too, because if you are, and again, we're skipping ahead a bit, but if you are a neurodivergent who is trying to pursue a relationship with a neurotypical, especially if they don't know, or even if you don't know that you're neurodivergent, discussing what sorts of things are good and what sorts of things are not quite as good in a relationship.
Right. So one of the things on my list is sensory issues with expected romantic activities. So again, a neurotypical will expect a certain level of physical intimacy.
I want you to hold my hand. I want you
They'll
to hug me.
expect hand holding. They'll expect kissing. They'll expect hand holding. They'll expect for you to touch them in private areas. They'll expect to touch you in private areas. And sometimes, things like body fluids happen from that, and that can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or, whatever that feeling, icky, whatever. And especially when you're sort of an emerging teen autistic, you might not be prepared for those things. So that's another thing that could absolutely help to talk to them about. You know that you're dating, I don't know, Stacy, let's call it this imaginary girl, a few times, and she's kissed you. So she might want to touch your pant area. How would you feel about that?
I mean, it's definitely a conversation. Generally, you would start the conversation by asking if they want to hold hands.
Right.
But I mean, it's a working up. But absolutely, sex is a very important thing to discuss, for the simple reason that if you're neurodivergent and you are with someone who expects, like you said, after a certain point in their relationship to be more intimate, that number one, you have to be aware of what you are willing to do.
And you have to be able to verbalize that to someone else. I don't like it when you touch me like that because it makes me feel.
Yes.
So could we please do something else?
Right.
And that goes, as you said, all the way from hand holding to the most intimate of activities.
And this is why relationships between neurodivergents and neurotypicals can be a bit complicated, because we are trained to associate certain activities with relationships. And if you're a neurodivergent who happens to, not be comfortable with touching of any kind, then telling your girlfriend or your boyfriend, I like you a lot, but I don't feel comfortable holding your hand, it's a bit of discord. It's a bit of a discrepancy. But I thought that that's what we're supposed to do.
Right. So as adults, believe it or not, a conversation that Moshe and I had and something we had to work on was that he initially didn't actually like kissing that much.
Correct.
He said, I don't kiss much. And I said, well, you've had other relationships. How did you know that you were romantic with them? And that was very confusing for me.
A lot of, and this is the problem that I was discussing. A lot of the autistics are very good mimics, and we're decent at mirroring activity. So this is good and bad because it allows us to function based on what other people are doing. This is how I should act in this situation because this person is acting the same way in this situation. But it becomes negative when you have to mirror someone who is either engaging in or wants to engage in something that they're not comfortable with.
Right. So
My girlfriend is trying to kiss me. So how do I reconcile my desire to not kiss anyone because it makes me feel uncomfortable with the fact that this is apparently the way I'm supposed to act?
and did act many times with me previously to that conversation.
Right.
So that was very confusing for me, probably very uncomfortable for you. It was just very weird all the way around.
It was.
And if somebody had taught you that it was okay to have boundaries, it probably would never have been an issue.
And this kind of gets into the other topic about, what you expect, establish a script that works for you.
It's kind of scary because it leads itself to the idea that an autistic person could actually be intimate with somebody like by accident.
Well, as I mentioned before in this episode and other episodes, just because someone has autism, much like any other, disability or condition or whatever you want to call it, disorder, the emotional and developmental milestones may not be being hit, but the physical things are still there. The body still wants to develop. The body still wants to procreate. And if you are a boy or a man and you are with a girl or a woman, provided that that's where your attraction lies, then you might accidentally or just by virtue of proximity end up in an intimate relationship just because it seems the most logical thing. And that's not necessarily a great thing, because I've encountered many situations in my own life where I engaged in activities that I was absolutely uncomfortable with just because I was asked to do them and it seemed like that was what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. So that's where I ended that because, again, you're a very different type of person. When he said that, I said, whoa, we got to talk about that. Like, kissing is very important to me, but we have to get to a level here. We have to figure this out.
Right.
I'm not just going to, and he did the thing that, I'm guessing that he always did, which was like, well, I'll just suck it up and do it. It doesn't matter that I don't like it that much. And I was like, no, we're going to work on this. And we did. And I think when we caught COVID and we couldn't kiss each other for a little while, he sort of realized that he missed it. And then that helped with that.
Because unfortunately, when you go from mirroring or mimicking or writing a script to how you actually feel, it can lead to accusations, quite rightly, of dishonesty. Because when you are an autistic who is masking, and masks can be fully interactive, like they can involve actual physical things, you can mask while kissing. You can mask while holding hands. You can mask while having sex. You can mask in the most awkward and intimate of circumstances. And the mask occasionally slips. And it was very common for me, not so common anymore, to be engaging in some sort of activity and just be like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then you have to sort of answer questions. Well, you were fine with it like for the last 2 weeks. Why don't you want to do this anymore? Well, I was never comfortable with it. And then, of course, it's a conversation. Mm-hmm. So why did you do it in the first place? Because I thought I was supposed to and I didn't want to.
But it makes the other person feel bad. It makes them feel like they've victimized you.
And the somewhat uncomfortable logical conclusion of that, and I don't mind sharing it for the purposes of highlighting my point, is several times in my own life, particularly when I was a teenager and a young adult, I was a victim of sexual violence being done to me because I didn't know how to say no, and I didn't know that I was allowed to say no, and I didn't know that I was supposed to say no. Because if you are
I'm glad we disclaimed this episode.
the kind of person who, if you're the kind of person who is taught to behave a certain way, and it becomes ingrained in your consciousness as appropriate conduct, because that all has to be scripted, then you end up in a position where someone wants to do something and you say, okay, and then you don't enjoy what you're doing. And afterwards, it leaves some very real scars on your emotional state that can definitely color future intimacies.
Honey, I'm really sorry that happened to you.
It did, and I have some even worse stories to tell about things like that. But I did promise last episode that this would be a much lighter thing. So
Yeah.
like we can get into that at a later time. But suffice it to say, the only reason I even brought it up at all was because when we're talking about appropriate things, in the article that Leah sent to me about things that you want to talk to your autistic teenager about, one of the things that it says is the other person asks you to do things that you feel safe and comfortable with.
Absolutely.
Because autistic people are oftentimes very suggestible.
Mm-hmm.
Not all, of course, but oftentimes. And if you're with a partner or a potential partner or a friend who asks you to do something that you're not comfortable with, you are allowed to say no.
Help your child or important autistic person to define their own boundaries,
right,
and to say that it's okay to keep them. Because again, it was a very awkward situation for me to literally have to do that as an adult with Moshe and say, no, I actually care about you. Like, let's talk about what's actually going on with you here and what your boundaries are.
Exactly.
Because I was an adult woman, so my boundaries were way out there.
Expectations were set for me because of a lack of understanding about the fact that I was autistic, and also a lack of respect for the people that were associated with me, that I was used, not just in the intimate sense, but as a friend, because I was very agreeable most of the time, and I was very funny, and I was very charming. And the negative side to that is this guy seems very safe. I'm gonna do whatever I want. I'm gonna ask him for things, and he's gonna say yes because he likes me and wants to make me happy. So he seems very safe.
So again, just summarizing, because we're spending the whole episode on this. Help your autistic individual who's important to you to know what their boundaries are and know that they can keep them. That they can say no. And if the person doesn't like them after they say no, they won't worth it anyway, and they weren't a good potential.
Exactly.
We're already sort of talking about sexuality here. So another thing you may want to discuss is your child's, I guess, or person's sexuality. Not only do you want to talk about their sexuality, but you want to be accepting of whatever comes. Because there tends to be, I mean, in human beings in general, a lot of sexual fluidity. And we can, I guess, talk about that, though we're not experts in it. There's a lot about it on the internet.
Right.
But neurodivergents also have a lot of sexual fluidity. It tends to sort of go together. Not always, of course, not everyone.
It can actually be seen as something of a good thing, because in many ways, autistic's lack of understanding of social boundaries and social mores and social cues can appear to often make them, and not just appear, but actually to make them feel very awkward and out of place and uncomfortable. But if they can accept and in fact welcome their divergency and their diversity, then they can realize that they're not necessarily bound by the labels that society often puts on people. Because if you are raised with the concept that there are people who are heterosexual and bisexual and homosexual, then you know where you fit, or potentially know where you fit. And especially as you develop more in your own sense of self and whatever, you can go, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm this or I'm that or I'm whatever. neurodivergents have a much higher instance of kind of, as Leah said, fluidity, where rather than trying to fit themselves into a box, they're just like, I'm attracted to this member of the same sex, but I'm also attracted to this member of the opposite sex. And I'm attracted to this person, that person, and this person. And who they are matters a lot less to them if they don't necessarily feel that they're bound by the idea that they have to fit into a particular category.
Right. So discussing what sexuality is, what attraction is, and that it's okay regardless of how they try, attempt to express that is especially important for the development of teenagers because a lot of people are in an experimental phase at that time.
Mm.
A lot of people are just trying things and they will figure out sort of where they fit later on in life. But you can't shame somebody into being something that they're not. So you absolutely need to have an open and honest conversation about that, regardless of how you might personally feel about it.
As Orthodox Jews, the idea of sexual orientation is not normally a topic that we discuss too much.
It's absolutely one in our house.
But the reality of the situation is, or what I tell people when they ask about that discrepancy, is my faith in God has nothing to do with my attraction or the attraction of any of the people that I'm close to.
Mm-hmm.
And I vehemently oppose the idea that somebody can be gay or non-hetero and not be a very religious person. You absolutely can, because who you choose to be with is irrelevant to your faith. And I am going to always stand up for that. I do have children that are, of that persuasion, and love and acceptance was present in all instances. And it doesn't matter or affect how I pray or what I believe in or who I am as a person. And if it did, I would be a huge hit.
Right. Because who are we as people, Moshe? Well, now we're attracted only to each other because we're in a monogamous relationship.
Right.
But we're both fluid.
Yes.
Theoretically speaking.
Yes.
Not that we have a chance to really test that.
We would want to.
Not that we would want to. And if we have at least 2 children, we're, at least looking like it's going to go that way for them.
And I've read some horrendous stories of various religious communities, whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or whatever, their children were rejected because their children were gay. And I would not adhere to a faith that opted to make me decide between who I am and who I love as a person. And my children, all of them, are exceptionally valuable human beings that I support. And if I'm going to tell one of my children that being Jewish means that they can't love who they want to love, then I would fully expect them to not believe that being Jewish was beneficial to them.
Right.
That's not at all what I mean.
Right. So that's how it is in our household. And we highly suggest that, the whole sexual fluidity thing is dealt with openness.
Yes. So if your child comes to you and expresses that they have romantic feelings for a member of the same sex,
horror is not the correct response.
There's certain extremes that you can go. I subscribe to the belief that you support your child on their journey and you don't try to stick a label on their forehead and then force them to stick to it. And again, that's not to say that sexual orientation is a choice. That's on the road I'm going down. But what I will say is that oftentimes as certain feelings develop, a child may waver between a bunch of different places, and you just kind of have to come along for the ride. And that doesn't mean that you're denying your child's feelings, and it doesn't mean that you're just kind of, throwing them in a pride parade either. Like you have to follow where your child wants to go in their journey.
Yeah. And our own life experiences helped us greatly with that. So that might be a good time, because especially when your romantic pool is doubled, right? It might be difficult to know when somebody is interested in you. And a certain thing that some autistics might not know, because they tend to be very out there, right? They tend to be very truthful and not be as prone to conceal things as others, is they may not know that other people often attempt to conceal their romantic feelings. It's like this little hard to get game that people play, or they may be embarrassed of the fact that they're attracted to someone, and that they actually do conceal the fact sometimes that they might be attracted to.
The problem, and it kind of goes back to the beginning of our scripting. When you are guided by overt signs and over the top gestures, and not very comfortable or familiar with subtle cues, then it's very common to miss things that would often be noticed. It says in this article that we sent that visual supports can help. That makes me a bit uncomfortable, only because I can't imagine sitting down with a teenager and going, this person is looking a certain way. What do you think they're looking at?
I think what they're discussing here is actually social stories. So like the videos that we showed to Avram about don't touch people without their permission,
Right.
but they're social stories that sort of grow with a person. So this is Sally. Sally's looking at Bill. What do you think Sally's thinking when she's looking at Bill? Stuff like that. They're talking about social stories as visual aids. They're not talking about like porn.
No, absolutely not. Definitely can need a disciplinary as well. So you're basically looking for subtle cues if you're a teenager who's neurodivergent that maybe you're missing. Why is that person always looking at me and smiling? Why does that person always approach me after class and want to walk with me?
Mm-hmm.
She keeps trying to accidentally touching me, or that guy keeps smiling and winking at me. What's wrong with him? Why does he keep doing that? Or he seems to always ask me what I'm doing after school. I don't know why he's so interested in what I'm doing.
Yes.
Like things like that. And it absolutely is stereotypical that, and again, this is not meant to highlight anything, but like I told Leah, when Facebook first came out and everyone was kind of looking for everyone, and so they realized that they didn't necessarily want to be in touch with everyone that they ever knew ever. I had a lot of messages from, girls in elementary school and the early parts of high school that were like, oh, it's so cool to see you on Facebook. I had such a huge crush on you. And I would be like, I don't actually even remember you.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the kind of person that I was then, where I would be so obtuse and so dense that I didn't even pay attention to where I was walking, let alone how people were reacting.
But you were so adorable, so I don't blame any of them.
I mean, I still am adorable. And
so that actually segues nicely into my next point, which is if they're nice to you, if they smile at you, if you want to eat lunch with you, if they want to walk with you, if they want to talk to you about stuff, that also conversely doesn't always indicate romantic interest. And that's an important thing to also drive home.
Yeah, appropriate conduct. So if somebody is smiling at you, maybe they like you as a friend. If somebody, is showing you signs that you might misinterpret, it's better to err on the side of caution and not, touch them inappropriately if you are reading the signals wrong. Appropriate touch, appropriate conduct, appropriate actions, appropriateness in general. And oftentimes an autistic person will say, I think that girl was flirting at me. She was smiling at me. But and the sad truth is she smiles at everyone because she works in a coffee shop and that's customer service. It's not necessarily that she was trying to ask to her. You can try.
Sometimes they are.
You can try. Never hurts to, or it shouldn't hurt to say, hey, you want to go out for coffee sometime? And they're like, no. I don't think so.
When you're in full mask, so like when you're well rested and you've prayed and you've had your coffee and all your medication, I've seen you dismantle service girls like in a second because you are one charming dude.
I really am. And it's a skill that I have. It's unfortunately a curse that I have to live with.
They don't know the real you like I do.
Yeah. If they did, they would run for the head.
No, they wouldn't. But yeah, it's interesting to watch an accomplished autistic like Moshe in full mask.
So anyway.
So masking. Let's talk about explaining what no means.
Yes. Like I said, it's very challenging to understand the concept of rejection, whether rejection is rejection and what rejection sounds like. An autistic person often struggles with the concept of not getting their way. And again, that's a bit of a touchy subject and really has more to do with applying it to other aspects of everyday life. And in general, if you want a particular toy or you want a certain thing to eat or you want something that you like, then you're going to want it. And that's just how it is. But when we're talking about like a person who is an independent entity, if they say no to you, especially if they say no to romantic, interest, then you have to be able to say okay and not pursue it.
But conversely, that you're also allowed to say no.
Absolutely. If you're trying to pursue someone and they say no to you, you're able to understand that and say, "Come on, please."
Right.
But also you, if
When
they
they
say,
say no,
would you like to hold my hand? You really like this person. You really want to be in a relationship with them, but you're just not comfortable with it. You have the right to say, "I'm sorry, I really like you, but I'm not comfortable with holding hands." And if that is a problem, then it needs to be discussed.
yeah,
When
absolutely.
you enter a relationship with a neurodivergent, this is just kind of one of those conversations that come up, and how you respond to it really shows how much you care.
The problem is that teens often don't have the level of maturity that's required for something like that. We'll be like, "Oh, he didn't hold my hand, so I guess we're not dating anymore." And
Right.
that's a hard thing. It really is. I can see why people are socialized into just doing whatever.
Because we teach people on how they're supposed to behave in relationships. And there's countless stories all over social media and Reddit and everything about how people who are autistic are very uncomfortable because their partner always wants to touch them or always wants to hold their hand in public or always wants to hold their hand in general or just seems to like to be really close to them. And they don't know how to say that it makes them uncomfortable without hurting their feelings. And that's something that they have to consider.
So that brings me to the next topic, which is discussing good and bad signs when it comes to a partner.
Right.
What would be signs that somebody may be a good partner for you? And what would be signs that somebody may be not a good partner for you?
Unfortunately, autistics are prone to taking people at their word. And the reality is, unfortunately, not everyone has the best of intentions.
Yes.
And if we take everything at face value and we don't have that sense of cynicism or mistrust or suspiciousness, then if a person, man or woman, sees you and likes you, they may often make you feel or do things that are either not things that they're comfortable doing or that are actually bad. And that's the problem that I ran into. And some of the things that, are common, for example, in good things, you're going to look for someone that asks you to do things that make you feel safe and conversely isn't going to make you do things that you don't feel comfortable doing. Person that is honest with you and doesn't try to mislead you or tell you lies or manipulate you.
All right. So somebody who cares about you will listen to you.
A person that doesn't expect you to do everything. For example, if you are with somebody and they say, I'd like to go to the movies today. And you're like, my social battery is a bit down today. Do you mind if we just stay home and watch a movie together? They're going to be okay with that.
Right.
They're going to say, "Oh, you know what? I really wanted to see a movie, but I understand. How about tonight? Maybe we just watch a movie tonight, but maybe later on, some other time, we can go out if you're feeling okay with it." Something that someone said to me once upon a time, and I keep quoting it despite, is you want to be with someone who is as excited to be around you as you are to be around them. Because one of my problems in relationships was I was the one who had to do everything. And by do everything, I mean pay for them, look after them, support them, emotionally support them. But when I needed that, they weren't. And what I had to discover is that not only was I looking in the wrong places when it came to the people I associated with, but also that the mark of a good relationship be it a friend or romantic, is someone who's just genuinely happy to be with you.
Exactly. And it's not a relationship at all, really, if they're not there, because relationships are two ways at minimum.
Absolutely.
Another red flag that I've actually taught Moshe as an adult, sadly enough, to look for is if somebody asks you for money all the time.
Yes. Many of the times that in order to be nice to people, when I did have money, I would pay for things for them. I would buy them gifts. I once worked someplace and one of my coworkers asked me if I would mind paying off her $5,000 credit card bill, to which I was happy to do because she said that she would really appreciate it. Blink, blink, blink. And of course I was happy to do it and not realizing what an imbecile I was. And as some of my own comeuppance, at a later time when I was financially strapped, I asked them if they could possibly help me out a little bit. And they're like, no, I don't really have anything right now. Right. Because that's the nature of it. And this is unfortunately why a lot of autistic and neurodivergent people struggle with being in relationships with both neurotypical and neurodivergent people. Because unless they're taught certain things, they don't always have the knowledge to know when they're being taken advantage of.
Right. So what are some good signs that you might want to be in a romantic relationship with someone?
Someone who is excited to be around you, someone who doesn't, bully you or say things that make you feel bad, someone who listens to you.
Mm-hmm.
You might spend, the first third of every date with them talking about the trends or the newest comic book that came out or the newest Marvel thing. Or did you catch that latest episode of like Doctor Who or whatever? And you could care less about Doctor Who. But if you care about them, you'll go, really? Tell me more about that. And conversely, they'll be like, okay, you know what? That was really interesting. Would it be okay with you if we talked about something else?
And yes, sometimes that literally has to be scripted on our date nights and stuff. Absolutely. So now, Moshe, I want to talk about the kids. And now I want to talk about, our family situation. And now I want to talk about finances. Okay, now we can talk about, he's not into trains, but I don't know, politics. Now we can talk about politics.
Yes. Keeping on topic, listening to them. Those are the examples that this article gives.
But give me your top 5 red flags. Your personal ones.
My personal ones?
Yeah, you've got enough life experience now.
Unfortunately. I have to go back to that adage that someone is just not that exciting to be around you. You are coming in there with everything that you got. And the person's like eye rolling, sighing, looking at their watch, looking at their phone, looking around. They just don't seem like they're paying attention. That's definitely a red flag for me. The other one is somebody that doesn't listen to what I'm saying. If someone says, can I give you a hug? And you're like, you know what? I would rather not. And they're like, oh, come on. Like, you're being dumb or whatever. So that's 2 things. Not respecting your boundaries, red flag. And not listening to you is a red flag. Asking for money or asking for anything, anything.
Especially if you don't have that close of a relationship, right?
There's different levels.
If you haven't been to the other person's house, if you hadn't had dinner with them, if you haven't met their parents, they shouldn't be asking you for favors like my legend.
Obviously, it's going to be someone who doesn't understand that I'm neurodivergent. Obviously now it's not going to be an issue, but in the past, if I expressed a particular concern and they were just like, I don't like.
Some of them do seem bizarre and out of left field, but you have to explain that, and that would require the person to care enough to listen. So
Right.
coming back to listen.
So listening is definitely a big one.
Well, the last thing that I have on the list here for this episode, because we've run out of time again, is to explain to your teen that teen romances often don't last forever. In our case, that absolutely wouldn't have been the case, but we had no way of knowing that, actually. Hindsight's 2020.
The reality is the majority of relationships that are begun before the age of 25 are going to end.
Right, exactly. So you discuss with them, that inevitable breakup that may be coming. you hope that they have a nice, long, and happy relationship with the person that they care about, but it's a possibility. And that they should maintain balance in their life. So letting go of all their friends and all their interests and never going to family gatherings, etc., just to pour all of the resources into this one person that may not last forever is not a smart idea.
Certain autistics, myself included, have a lot of trouble with attachment. Some of them don't get attached at all, and some of them get too attached. And when you are the kind of autistic that I am, who gets very emotionally invested in literally everyone, which is why I have to hold most people at a distance. It's not because I'm standoffish or arrogant. It's because I literally cannot get close to you and get bonded with you and then have you disappoint me because it will absolutely destroy. And the reality is, unfortunately or fortunately, depending, if you are a teen, even an older teen like 18 or 19, and you're in a relationship, I'm really sorry, but chances are good, in fact, almost certain that it will not last. It may end after a few weeks. It may end after a few months. It may even end after a few years, but it's not going to last.
23 years?
Yes. So when you have the kind of person who gets very emotionally invested in relationships, you have to accept that there is going to be disappointment. There is going to be sadness. And deciding when you're 13 or 14 that you have to just give up your whole life and devote it fully to this one person who you can't bear to be away from ever, 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 ever is not healthy. Nor is, I mean, to be fair, it's not healthy anyway. Because one of the red flags is a partner who asks you to give up everything to pander to them.
Right.
That's also a big deal.
But again, that was our experience, but later in life and retrospective. And, results not typical.
No, unfortunately, they're not typical. If you are very fortunate and happen to meet your soulmate when you're 7 years old, then mazel tov. That is wonderful for you. And I wish, all the love and happiness in your life. But if you're the kind of person who is emotionally invested in a new partner, be very cautious. And if you are the parent of a autistic teenager who is now fully obsessed with their new girlfriend or boyfriend, it's probably a good idea to discuss not giving up everything about themselves just to immerse themselves in a relationship that may not unfortunately last.
Yep.
And when the inevitable breakup does happen, you can support your child by encouraging them to be close to family and do things that they enjoy and to talk about their feelings and express themselves. They can write a journal, they can write letters, they can spend a week in their room crying. I mean, it's completely normal. And sending angry emails or texting their now ex or
begging them back constantly.
Don't do
that.
And don't start bullying them or spreading rumors about them at school either, because that's not cool. Okay. That is all for this topic. I think, Leah.
Well, that's all the time we have. I'll tell you that. We are going to have a third episode where we promised you that we're going to discuss love on the spectrum.
Right.
And why two autistics together isn't necessarily the best. But I think that is going to be a shorter episode and maybe premium content.
For sure. So thank you very much for listening. Well, that's our show for today. One autistic, just a little bit better. So something you may not know about some autistics is that we often struggle with ending social interactions. So, Leah?
All right, Moshe, I'll take care of it. Thank you for listening to Now You Know One Autistic. See you next week.